Chapter 6570. Charlie said with a rogue attitude, "Don't say this nonsense. If you don't let me get in the car today, you can't leave." "I said it." Pete Roger stared at Charlie, suppressed his anger, and warned in a cold voice. "Sir, I'm not kidding you. You'd better get out of the way immediately and don't get yourself into unnecessary trouble." "Charlie didn't," he said disdainfully. "You are such a talkative person." "I still say the same thing. If you don't let me get in the car, you can't leave. Unless you shoot me, I don't believe that you dare to do it in front of Mr. Mitsui." Pete Roger suddenly had a headache. His original task was to take Tawana away to deal with it alone. As a result, at the party just now, Tawana's boyfriend Trevor insisted on following. He didn't want to affect his actions, so he could only let Trevor go with him. Now there is a man who claims to be Tawana's bodyguard. If he lets him get in the car again, there will be 2 more people than the original plan. However, he can also see that Charlie is obviously not someone who can give up easily. If he doesn't let him get in the car, he will probably stay and not leave. But he can't show his true colors in front of Mitsui Yoshitoka now. In that case, even if he can barely complete the task, it will be difficult for him to get out of it. He carefully weighed the pros and cons and finally had no choice but to grit his teeth and say to Charlie, "Okay, you can come up. But I warn you that you must strictly abide by our requirements." "Okay." Seeing that he had no choice, Charlie smiled triumphantly and then immediately stepped onto the step of the Toyota bus. Peter Roger blocked the door, glanced at Charlie coldly, and thought to himself, "Since you are looking for death, don't blame me for sending you on your way." Seeing that he was blocking the door and not moving, Charlie couldn't help but urge him. "Haven't you heard of it? A good dog doesn't block the road. How can I get up if you don't get out of the way?" Peter Roger was so angry that he almost vomited blood. With a ruthless heart, he flashed to make way for Charlie. Charlie stepped into the car and saw that there were a total of 6 people in the car except the driver. This Toyota bus originally had 20 seats. But it was obviously modified, so only 4 rows of first-class seats were left, with 2 seats in each row. At this time, a white person was already sitting in the first row, and the empty seat was most likely for Pete Roger, while Tawana and Trevor were sitting in the second row. And there were 2 people sitting in the third row. After Charlie got in the car, he looked at the situation. When he looked into Tawana's eyes, Tawana was surprised and puzzled. She couldn't understand why he came to join in the fun when she and him didn't like each other. When Charlie made eye contact with her, he was thinking that this woman and her boyfriend were now sandwiched in the middle. And except for the front windshield, the other windows of the car were all blackened. And the outside couldn't see the inside at all. If the 4 of them wanted to attack them in the car, they would have no chance at all. Pete Roger said to the man in the first row, "Lucas, go to the last row and let him sit in your seat." Just as the man named Lucas wanted to stand up, Charlie put his hand on his shoulder and pushed him back to his seat. At the same time, he walked towards the last row and said with a smile, "How can I ask you to give up your seat for me? I'll just go to the last row and make do." Pete Roger's heart tightened immediately. His plan was to let the 2 people in the third row attack Tawana and Trevor as soon as the car drove out of the dome. The lethal dose of injection drugs had been prepared long ago. He only needed to stand up and stab and push the 2 people in the neck, and the 2 would die immediately within half a minute. Originally, all this was effortless, but he never thought that Charlie, the troublemaker, would sit in the last row as soon as he came up. If he really let him sit in the last row, he could see the actions of all the people in front of him clearly. At that time, not to mention injecting drugs into them when they were not paying attention. It is very likely that Charlie would find out as soon as the syringe was taken out. So, Peter Roger subconsciously pulled Charlie and said, "Just sit in the first row." Charlie shook his arm, shook off his hand, and said impatiently, "I can sit wherever I want. Do you need to give me instructions?"